let me introduce you to everybody. I got Mr. Bryan Beller here, world-renowned bass player for acts like Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, Dweezil Zappa, Mike Kenealy. It goes on and on and on. Even singers, James.
Even LaBrie, singers. Oh my God! Right, I'm slumming it on the side.
And of course, the Aristocrats. He was also a contributing writer for Bass Player magazine for more than 10 years. Big contributor. The Aristocrats just released their fourth live record on May 7th called Freeze, as you can see, live in Europe 2020. Again, Bryan, thanks for being here, man. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Live in Europe 2020. That's rare thing.
right
Anywhere in 2020 is a pretty rare thing. It's cool that you got this record from 2020. It's great. There's got to be a story, right? Freeze, where did the freeze come in? Was it cold, or did you get arrested?
Both of those are likelier explanations than the actual truth, I have to say, on the grand odds scheme of things. But no, freeze is a double entendre. On the one hand, of course, you could see, I'm going to step out of the way here so you could see the album cover in its entirety. You can see that we are that's us on the bottom, those three Lego guys, and we're trying to get to the gig because look, we're playing. There's the marquee, there's the theater, and we're trying to get there, but no, the cop says freeze, you can't do that because COVID, safety measures and all the rest of that stuff. And it was a metaphor for everybody's tours getting canceled, and everybody had to stop and just go home and do that whole thing. So and the scene of the cover here is actually pretty cool if you look closely at the cap that the penguin policeman is wearing. It has an insignia of the Metropolitan Police from Milano in Italy, and this is actually an Italian piazza. And the artist is Italian who did it, Tom Colby. He did our artwork for Culture Clash Live and Culture Clash and Tres Caballeros, and so he's been with us a while. And we gave him this concept, and he came up with this idea. But freeze also is something that I would say on stage as part of the story behind the song, The Ballad of Bonnie and Clyde. Without retelling that whole story, it was about how all my basses, my storage locker was broken into in 2016. All my basses were stolen. And I got really obsessive and 3 days later, by some miracle, I found the people who had stolen them and led the police to them. And then the police came, and, I tell the story that they're all yelling, freeze, like the cops came and, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Anyway, so that we thought it was good on a couple of levels. But the more important, the freeze is funny, but the more important bit is there's the backwards finger. There we go. Is the live here in Europe 2020? So is there a story? Yeah. I mean, we were in Italy in February 2020.
Yep.
From doing shows from the 16th to the 25th. Those were the scheduled shows.
Wow.
And that's exactly when COVID really started to show up in Italy, and everybody remembers that it was in Italy first.
Yep.
And we went down south, and we're coming back up north. Now, February 24 and 25 were the last two shows that we had in Italy. One was in Torino, and one was in Montebelluna. That's the northwest and the northeast of Italy. And those 2 days were the very first shutdowns, by the government, of basically all businesses and shops were closed by order of the government in the entire Western world. Were those 2 days. That's when it started, February 24. And we just got out of Italy as fast as we could, and we went to Austria because that's where the next show was. And the day after we got there, they reported the very first case of COVID in Innsbruck. And then we went to a small town in Austria, and we did the last show there. And then we flew to Moscow, where we finished the tour on fly dates. It was Moscow, St. Petersburg, Dublin, Ireland, and then Oxford, UK. And it hadn't really gotten up north yet. So we were able to finish the tour on March 5, as scheduled. We flew home on March 6, and then the worldwide shutdowns happened. I believe it was March 11, where all the flights stopped, and everybody had to go home. So, I mean, it was just we barely outrun the thing, but we got, we're lucky. We got the whole tour done. We got the American leg done in 2019, North America. And then we did 5 weeks in Europe in late 2019. And then we did 6 weeks in Europe in early 2020. And we finished on March 5, I can't complain about that.
No doubt. I mean, that is like right on the money. I mean, you guys are being tracked by that COVID thing.
Yeah. And just
yeah.
to show you, I mean, like we watched other bands who were in the middle of their tours, obviously, start posting cancellation notices. They're just like, well, we got to go home. We're in South America, we got to go home. We're in Asia, we got to go home. We're in Europe, we got to go home. And then Joe Satriani I was going to go on tour with him starting in April 2020 for a year, and that thing never even got off the ground. The whole thing got completely wiped out, like so many others. So
yeah. Wow. Now I've heard you say that you've appreciated a little bit of the downtime. You're a busy guy. I mean, totally.
My reputation precedes me, but it's like you got to be careful. You don't want to be the person who's like too busy to like get work.
Yeah, right.
But usually touring is the whole thing. And of course, I was booked for a year with the Aristocrats and a year with Joe Satriani. There wasn't a lot of room in the middle of all that to do anything. And then suddenly, wham, it all stopped. And I went home, and I hadn't been home without like some, big mission. Like I took a year off in 2017 to write my entire solo album, Scenes from the Flood, a double progressive concept album that came out in 2019. I wasn't exactly relaxing that year. But I was home all year. I hadn't been just home for months, going it slow. I can't remember, it had been over 2 years. So and I think a lot of people, regardless of whether they're even musicians or not, have gone through this reevaluation process. Like, what's life really all about? Like, why are we running around like maniacs? Why?
Absolutely. And, that's a silver lining for sure. That introspective look back on your life. My wife works downtown Chicago, and she's been home the whole time, and she's going out of her mind now a little bit, but we were together, and it's like, hey, this, I'm getting to know you again.
It's great that you guys are still together, because of course we all know about the COVID divorce phenomenon. It's like people who haven't been really together in a long time, suddenly together all the time. It changes things.
Oh yeah.
And some relationships were built to exist in a certain model, and some were not. And kind of forced everyone to have to confront that a little bit. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not sure, but it definitely happened.
Yep. We're hitting 30 years this year, so I don't think
that's awesome. Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. And happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
A few days ago, 6 days ago, something like that. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I don't post that stuff on social media, but I'm happy to say thank you.
Yeah, it's awesome. Live albums. You got 4 live albums with the Aristocrats. What is it about the live records that you guys love? You got 4 studio albums and 4 live albums. It's
I guess you're are you counting a Secret Show live in Osaka? Yeah. They're one of those was, so it's funny. Well, first of all, we're a live band. The whole thing really happens on stage. And we knew that from the very first gig when we jammed together at the NAMM show in 2011, that it was like, wow, listen to what happens when we play live. But then you got to make records so that you have records so that your written material has a reference point.
Right.
And also you have something to promote when you go on tour and the whole thing. So we do the studio albums, but more often than not, I would say maybe Tres Caballeros is an exception, because we did some shows on that material before we recorded the album. But, in general, we do the records, and then we take the music on tour, and like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 shows in, the music is still developing. It's not jazz where it's just, okay, here's the head. Now we're all going to blow solos for 10 minutes. Now I'll play the head. And okay, thank you very much. It's not that. But it's also not just pure rock through composed form either. It's a mix. And so there's room for improvisation inside these structures, lots of room to have fun with them. And the songs really, some of them don't even blossom until like the 60th show. So we always feel like when we have live, when these things are captured live, that is a truer reflection of the spirit of the band than what happens on the records, even though, of course, we're very proud of the records, the studio albums, and we're always working hard to make them as good as we can. So that's the story with Live in Europe being the 4th album. We did a live album after the first album called Boeing Will Do It Live.
Yep.
We really wanted to make a live statement right off the bat because, you know, this is the first studio album. You don't even really know what you're doing as a band the first time you go in the studio. Right. And we're like, that's okay. But and we're grateful that people like it so much, but we're like, hey, listen to this. This is what we really sound like. Right. And that was cool. Then we did Culture Clash. And then we went around the world. You know, we didn't have an idea of making a live album, but it was our first world tour, true world tour.
Right.
And people were offering us at the venues, hey, we can record the show for a very small amount of money and we'll video too. And we started to kind of get into this thing where we were like, well, I remember what started it. We were going to do a DVD in Mexico City because Mexico City has the loudest, boisterous fans. It's a great energy and everything. Anyway, we went down there and technically the whole thing went sideways. It ended up not being the show that we really wanted to play. The gear wasn't quite right. The sound wasn't quite, it just didn't happen, you know?
Okay.
And we were like, oh, and then we started going on tour around the world and people were saying at a venue, be like, we have a multi-track recording facility. We have a video capability. We can record you. And we'd be like, all right, let's try it. And every time we tried it, we'd get like, you know, a couple songs, but it wasn't the show that we wanted. It started to kind of become like Schrodinger's show, you know, where like just the fact that we were going to record it changed the nature of it and not necessarily in a positive way. So we kept going throughout the whole world tour, you know, taking another opportunity, taking another whack out of it. None of them were the full complete show. And I remember when we got to the very end, Osaka was the very, very last show of a 120 city world tour. And they came to us and they said, we could all record the show for you. And we were so frustrated, especially Guthrie, with the idea of a pressure on another recorded show. And the live was the last. We were all like, you know what? No, we're not recording this show. We're not going to do that. We're just going to go up there and have fun. And of course, it was the best show of the tour. and after it was over, the front of house engineer, a very quiet Japanese guy, of course, came to us and said, I have 2-track recording. And we were like, really? So that was when we made the decision, okay, we'll master this 2-track recording. We'll call it Secret Show Live in Osaka. And we'll put out Culture Clash Live, which will be a compilation of all the best stuff from all the shows that went wrong. And because there were some good bits in that and really good bits. And they ended up being a really great live representation. I'm telling a long story now, but you know, we decided not to do a live album for Tres Caballeros because we had put out like 2 live albums for Culture Clash.
Right.
So when we were out for you know what, we weren't really thinking about recording a live album because we remembered what it was like the last time we tried to do it. And but at the same time, technology's gotten a lot easier. And so our front house engineer was multi-track recording every single show. Like there's no pressure. We just have it. Yeah. And so we had it and we listened to a little bit of it halfway through the European tour. Said, all right, let's put some audience mics up, but you know, we don't need to make a big deal of it. And then the tour ended and then COVID happened. And then after a couple months of us all kind of like being in shock, like, what are we going to do? It was like, well, we've got these 100 recordings. Right. You know, or it wasn't 100. It was 57 shows or something like that in Europe. Yeah. And we're like, let's see what we got. And when I went into the shows from Spain, I felt like we had something really special there, especially Sevilla. It was just a night where everything kind of went right. And we had a really special drum solo from Bilbao and a version of Get It Like That I think we were really proud of. And so we just decided to showcase all material from You Know What, except for Get It Like That. Which means that there's no Tres Caballeros material on there, but we also didn't want to repeat a bunch of stuff that had been on the first 2 live albums. The world's longest answer.
That's great, though. That's great. I was not aware of that Japanese story of that album. That's so cool.
That's the story of Secret Show. And the thing is it's not one of our official releases. Like it never came out through distribution. It's not distributed digitally. We printed 2,000 CDs and when they were gone, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. That's way cool. It's a big collector's item for sure. Yeah. I was going to ask you how much of the live show is improvisational jamming. Because years ago I saw Jeff Berlin, Scott Henderson, and Mike Clark play as a trio. And it reminded me, hearing this album reminded me of that show because it's avant-garde. It was not so much in style, I guess, but just the improvisational kind of playing off of each other. I got that feeling from this record a lot. And you were saying that it's you guys improvise quite a bit, but not to a jazz standpoint.
Yeah, well, I know. Yeah, and it's hard for me to know like how jazzy that record with Jeff Berlin and those guys was. I'm imagining it's probably jazzier than what we were doing.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I mean, there are bits where it's through composed, and there are bits where it's open, and it's pretty obvious, I think, where they are, right?
Yeah, totally.
Like in a song like Spanish Eddie on the live album, there's an extended improvisational introduction that's not on the studio album at all.
Right.
Just something that kind of showed up. It was the first couple of times we did it. And we're like, that's cool. It's just a little playground. Let's just have a little fun with this motif before we even start the song.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of the song, there's the section that Guthrie likes to call the New York jazz guy. Well, it's funny because when on the demo, it's very deliberately the New York City jazz guy that he sent us, like, soloing. It's supposed to be like, the guy in the jazz club doing real clean guitar, and suddenly it's a total pastiche.
Okay.
But when we got into the studio, it always ended up going from New York City jazz guy in the first 20 seconds to like total mayhem, like within a minute. And that there was just no way to avoid it, it seemed. So we just decided to keep going with it. And so that would go, by the end of the tour, it was going in all different directions. I mean, if you listen to the live version, cool. On Live in Europe 2020, it's crazy. There's like 6 different styles in 40 seconds.
Yeah.
So great. I mean, yeah, and then it comes back to the form where that heavy part comes back, what we call the Spanish Eddie part. That's obviously composed, right?
Right.
So those moments go back and forth, and we know as a band where they are and where we can push, but we also every once in a while will throw a little embellishment in on a bit that is through composed form, just to keep it interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's really cool. And that's what's great about the live records from you guys is you're getting something different than the studio version, for sure.
You're also getting something different than what happened the night before.
Yeah.
It's like that. I mean, of course, there are things that are the same, but there's also things that are different. So it really does depend on the night, the sound in the room, the vibe in the room, the vibe of the crowd, what we had for dinner that night. I mean, it could be anything. The tours are weird.
It's pretty cool. It's really cool. It's got to keep it interesting for you and for the guys in the band, for sure.
Yeah.
The Aristocrats, each of you have 3 songs on each record. It's really, I mean, it's that's the way it is every record. Tell me how that process works. Do you write 3 songs and then go and those are your 3, or do you write 10 and bring them in and everybody decides? And how collaborative is it?
Well, different Aristocrats would give you different answers to that question. This Aristocrat writes 3 songs specifically for the Aristocrats. The guitar playing Aristocrat would give you an answer very similar to mine. The drums playing Aristocrat would give you a completely different answer, and you would have a big pile of songs to choose from, because that's how he rolls. And so we're different in that way. But I mean, the 3 songs each is something that happened from the very first album. We didn't really know each other that well. Marco and I knew each other better than we knew Guthrie, but it all happened pretty fast. Like the first show was January. We decided, let's make a record. Suddenly it was the end of April. We're about to go in the studio, and I had 1 demo, and we had already decided we would contribute 3 songs each, just as let's see how this works. We didn't know. And we each pulled a song from our back catalog that hadn't been fully exploited yet. So, like Guthrie's Get It Like That, which, as you can see, lives on to this day, was on an early solo album of his. Bad Asteroid was something Guthrie had kicking around ever since he was 20 years old. And See You Next Tuesday was on my first solo album, View, back from 2003. So that was 8 years old already. And so we only really had to write 2 songs. And I remember it was like 5 days before the first album, and I didn't have my 3rd song. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And I had 1 day where I could do it. And I woke up, and that was the morning that I woke up with Flatlands in my head. Wow. So sometimes deadlines focus the mind. Yeah. But once it worked the first time, then we were like, well, it would just be more work to try and come up with a better way. And so on Culture Clash, we did it again, and then it worked, and it kept working. But we don't write together. We don't collaborate as composers. We're fully capable of making our own demos, and we just found that it's just easier to just make the demo complete and then just send it to the other guys in the band and be like, well, here it is. And of course, that process gets easier now that we know each other so well, because we can write for each other's strengths. And we know when we write a bit, who's going to have fun with it and all the rest.
Right. So it's not collaborative at all. Well, you write your song.
Well, It's collaborative when we sit down and play it together. Then it becomes an Aristocrats song. But in the composition process, no, we write in isolation.
Wow, that's pretty great. That's pretty, and that takes a lot of trust, I think, in the band dynamic.
Well, it also recognizes the reality that Guthrie lives in the United Kingdom and that Marco and I live in California, and that we don't have a band rehearsal room that we can just go down into to work this shit out anyway. You know, so I mean, it is what it is, but it also happens to be, I think, the best possible option and the best way for us, because you know, we all had solo albums out and we all had done clinics. So we all had the capability of writing a complete song, demoing a complete song. We knew what it was like to put out albums and to be on stage and have to be the guy on the microphone who's holding the room. That was an unusual constellation of abilities.
Yeah.
And we got a little lucky.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Now you've worked with a lot of distinct personalities over the years. Steve Vai, you know, I know he's got a reputation for being, you know, demanding a lot. He wants the best out of all his players, and we'll get it. Guthrie, kind of the same, you know, very private guy, you know, the amazing player, you know, many different kinds of personalities that you've worked with. Has there been anybody that's been really difficult to adjust to, either musically or personally?
You know, not really, but even if there was, I wouldn't go into it in an interview.
Okay.
You know, I mean, it's like there's the world is difficult enough, right? You know, I mean,
right. Yeah.
I mean,
well,
you know,
I mean,
there's always
so many different styles though, too, that you played, you know, to adjust to musically.
I don't think any of this is a big secret. I mean, like I've been fortunate enough to play with a bunch of really, really amazing dudes. You know, Mike Kenealy, let's just talk about him for a second. You know, he's just this kaleidoscopic, you know, genius who has just an unbelievable versatility in his songwriting and musical repertoire. And he's a very, very kind of laid back, peace and love kind of guy, but he's capable of writing really, really intricate parts too. Now he's not like a Vi character. He's not going to be like, it's got to be like this and da 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 da. But if the part's the part, you got to play it, and he'll know if it's not right. You know, there's more than one way to deliver that message. Right. You know, and I'm not saying that Steve is like this all the time, but he could be, and everybody knows that because he learned from Frank Zappa, who was like 10 times as much like this as Steve would ever be. Steve's a great guy. But Steve obviously wants, you know, the parts to be performed correctly and rehearses for a long time. Absolutely. And I remember I was younger when we did that, and we did the same thing. You have to rehearse for a long time on all of this stuff, really, because whether you do it as a band or you do it in isolation, none of it is automatic. You know, even at our level, whatever that is, you got to put in the work. You got to learn the stuff, you know, especially these parts that Guthrie writes are really, really difficult on bass. He's a great bass player. Okay. So, you know, Guthrie knows when it's not right. Mike Kenealy knows when it's not right. Joe Satriani knows when it's not right. And that is not limited to just, are you playing a basic groove? Because a lot of Joe Satriani structures are a little bit more simple. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're easier. You know, you have to deliver a tone and a groove and a vibe. And he is paying attention. Believe me, people don't understand the amount of detail that Joe Satriani puts into his artistry and what makes it work. So every one of these guys, just because maybe Steve has a little bit more of a public-facing persona of the maestro, you know, every one of these guys has a vision for their own artistry, including me. I know when my own songs are being performed. I haven't had a lot of live performances of my own material, but I have had a few. I know when they're being performed correctly, and I know when they're not being performed correctly. And I prefer it when they're being performed correctly.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Because only when they're performed correctly, first, can you start to have fun with it and explore it and expand it in the way that a live performance in an ideal situation can do? Yeah.
Yeah. And like I say, I mean, you played so many styles, and that's the thing with Steve's work is very Zappa, like a lot of it is really weird time signatures and things like that. So, you know, I would imagine that's very difficult to adjust to, coming from like a more accessible Satriani thing.
It really comes down to ensembles becoming ensembles and interpreting difficult rhythms as an ensemble, because, you know, you can get it right on your own, but then you have to mesh with the group, and the group has to act as one if they're executing really difficult rhythms. If there's rhythms that are on top of each other and they're different, then they still have to execute as one in those two spaces.
Yeah.
It's an ensemble thing. That's the thing that comes together. And that's the same thing with Joe. if we're playing, I mean, there's some complicated Joe stuff too. I mean, there's some fast stuff that's hauling ass, and then every once in a while there's complicated rhythmic stuff. There's some metric modulation stuff in time. There was a song on the last album that was a fast shuffle that had a few hairy licks in it. But if you're playing Flying in a Blue Dream, that has to sound right and feel right as a unit, not just me sitting there making sure that the eighth notes are grooving and making sure there's just the right amount of attack on each note, and that it's consistent and that it feels right when the section changes and the emotional lifts come in the right places and all the rest of that stuff. Everybody in the band has to do that together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, Joe knows when it's right and he knows when it's not right.
Yeah. Yeah. Writing for your solo stuff, the 2019 Scenes from the Flood, a very different record than, the Aristocrats, really. Is there something you do different in your preparation for writing? Like if you're going to write for the new Aristocrats record, or you're going to write something like Scenes from the Flood, is there something that, is there a switch you switch and say, all right, this is my solo record and then this is my Aristocrat? How does that process work?
I do separate them pretty cleanly, and I think that Guthrie does as well. Marco doesn't necessarily do that because a lot of his material could go in a lot of different directions. And I don't mean to put words in these guys' mouths, but I know that they've had interview answers, and that's what the answer is. So we're all a little bit different in that way. I know that for me, I understand what the Aristocrats is as an entity now that we've been around for 10 years. People aren't coming to have like the Pink Floyd, Nine Inch Nails, emotional outpouring, heavy experience with us. It doesn't mean that they can't be moved. We want to move them and make them have a great time and enjoy melodies and stuff like that. But, it's not heavy. It's not contemplative and kind of dark, which is a different kind of artistry. The Aristocrats are about, we play a lot of notes. We're having fun. We'll take the piss out of a few genres. We'll communicate as a band, do a lot of live improv stuff. Hopefully we'll deliver a few memorable melodies along the way and make you laugh and also not take it all too seriously. I mean, in that way, it is very, it comes from a different angle of the Zappa world. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, we're doing stuff. Some of it's hard, some of it's dumb. All of it's supposed to be with a wink and a nod, hopefully, so that we can all go home and we all have a good time.
Right. And that's, that's exactly what I was going to ask you next is, you just described Zappa music.
Right.
That's, right down to the title of the name of the band.
Of course. Yeah. I mean,
not the joke, right? It's very Zappa-like. Is everybody a Zappa, influenced by Zappa? And
we all have different influences, but Zappa is one of the common ones. There's things that Marco and I are into, like metal, that Guthrie's not into. There are things that Guthrie and Marco are into, like Bjork, that I'm not necessarily into. It doesn't mean I don't like it. I just don't have it.
Right.
And then there's stuff that Guthrie and I are into, like, for example, like the Beatles, that Marco's kind of like, So, I mean, everybody's got, and that circle continues. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in that conversation. But for all of us, Led Zeppelin, Frank Zappa, Queen. Marco's a huge Queen fan, more than me. But there are a few common ones, and Zappa's probably the biggest one, both in ethos and humor, but also, technical stuff. Now, just to get back to your other question, obviously, Scenes from the Flood is not coming from that kind of place. Right. Scenes from the Flood and my own personal artistry is much more influenced by some of the contemplative, slightly, I don't want to say darker, but heavier stuff. I mean, I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan. There's not really a meaningful way to bring Pink Floyd into the Aristocrats. I'm not sure I'd even want to. But in my own solo artistry, I really strive for that because I feel like, I'm a progressive guy at heart. I kind of was like a little bit on the fence of, am I a fusion guy? Am I an instrumental rock guy? And all that. But in the end, the compositions that move me the most are the progressive stuff. Right. And I'm a huge Yes fan. I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan. And I'm also a really big Nine Inch Nails fan. And I think that what Trent does is at an elemental level progressive. And I'm not sure that he gets enough credit for that. I know that he's into Pink Floyd. But so when I was sitting down to write Scenes from the Flood, I had this very, very intricate narrative and this, kind of heavy story that I wanted to tell, and, on a personal level and then also on a human nature level and all the rest of these things, a lot of things to think about and things in the beginning of the record that tie to the end of the record. And,
that's awesome.
None of that has anything to do with the Aristocrats at all. Right. Literally, it's a completely different world. Now, you could listen to something on that record and listen to a Bryan Beller Aristocrats song and probably be like, oh, wait a minute, this guy wrote both these songs. Yeah. But context matters. Context matters.
Yeah. I mean, that the solo record is phenomenal. I mean, it's very deep. It's very moving, very emotional. I really enjoy it.
So ideally, there's a space for both of these things, and so it's when I sit down and write, I know when I'm writing for the Aristocrats that I'm really trying to keep it to 3 voices because I want it to be executed live, in a way that sounds recognizable. I don't have to worry about that with my own solo stuff, and that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, that's very cool. Very cool. You've played some pretty cool gigs. You've been around the world, and let's not forget Dethklok.
It's so funny that you mentioned that because I don't know if you've been watching social media today, but we can break some news here on
all right.
Adult Swim has greenlighted a Metalocalypse movie.
Nice.
The news just broke 2 hours before we started recording this podcast.
Look at that.
So it's an exclusive.
Yes.
But yeah. And I feel bad that I left out Brendan Small in that list of amazing guitarists that I was talking about earlier because Brendan's a genius. Yeah. I mean, he's amazing to have come up with the whole concept of a cartoon that's a metal band that is super famous. And of course it's a celebrity parody, but actually the music that's being written for this fake metal band is really cool. And we all got to play it live, and I love metal. And so it was like a dream come true to actually be in a metal band and do that whole thing. And so the idea the idea that there's going to be suddenly a Metalocalypse feature film,
awesome.
I'm sitting here as the bass player in live Dethklok going, so I hope cool. Nothing, all I know is what's been publicly announced. So there's no other news, but I'm excited, of course.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Dethklok has played some major high profile stuff. Mayhem Fest, the San Diego Comic-Con. Back to my original question. You guys played on the USS Midway, an aircraft.
They flew us in on a helicopter. It was so metal.
How cool is that, man?
It was amazing.
It had to be. Now you've played shows like that, and you've played all over the world in really cool old venues and just great gigs you've had over the years. Is there a place that one that really holds a majesty for you?
Well, I like to say the story of every musician is that one day you play for 5,000 people and the next day you play for 50. And both of those shows mean, everything anyway. It's not really about the number of people who are there. A couple of the Aristocrats shows that we had were like for 125 people in Des Moines or something like that. And they were some of my favorite moments. Of course, playing for 4,000 people in the Aragon Ballroom with Dethklok co-headlining with Mastodon is a completely different experience. And were you there?
I wasn't.
Oh God!
I wasn't. I wish I was.
It was a great show. I mean, I've never been in the Aragon Ballroom before.
Oh, really?
Oh my God, what a room! And and so that's a totally different experience.
Yeah.
Ideally, they all give you something that's great. And so cool. I was singling out one venue. That's there's a place, for the Aristocrats, our home base is kind of like this venue called Alva's Showroom in San Pedro, California. And the capacity is 90. Yeah. So we just like to go there, and kind of work out material when we got new stuff and do it in front of a small crowd. There's a venue in the Netherlands called De Boerderij, which is in, Zoetermeer. And this actually does sound a bit odd in there, so you have to get used to it and play there a couple of times. But once you do, it's a great room, and you're playing for one of the greatest audiences, the most well-educated music audiences in the world. The people of the Netherlands, and that's always a special moment for me.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, that aircraft carrier had to be something, man. I heard that.
Oh, it sounded terrible though. It was a mess.
Yeah, I bet it was.
It was really awful, actually. But it wasn't about that. It didn't matter. It was about the story. Dethklok lands on an aircraft carrier.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Do you have something that you've always wanted to do musically that you haven't yet? I mean, you've done so much. Is there a gig that you've always wanted to play, or a collaboration?
Well, I mean, God, I mean, there's just so. I mean, I would love to just go back in time and be the bass player for live Pink Floyd in 1977 on the Animals tour.
I saw that tour, actually.
You did?
I did.
I mean, hey, Roger, you could just sing. You don't have to play bass. I'll play bass for you. I was 6 years old. I don't know if that would have worked, but no, I mean, I could think of 20 artists. Or how about this? I would, if I could be the bass player in Rage Against the Machine in 1993, that would, my life would be complete. Yeah. I'm a big Rage Against the Machine fan.
Absolutely.
But I think that a lot of it is just kind of destiny. We set ourselves up, and then the dice roll, and you are where you are. So I'm open to other opportunities. I'm also very grateful for what I've had, and I don't feel incomplete.
Yeah, that's great to hear. You've worked hard for for the things you've gotten. Of course, a student of Berklee. Is there anybody mediocre that comes out of Berklee?
Yes, yes.
Is there really? I haven't seen anybody.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. I mean, maybe you haven't heard of them, but
maybe that's why.
Music school. Listen, music school is no guarantee that someone's going to be great, and not going to music school is not a guarantee that they're not going to be great. I mean, I'm grateful for my Berklee education. Don't get me wrong. I'm more grateful for the fact that I met Joe Travers at Berklee College of Music, and he got me my first gig with Weasel Zappa. So it was just as much of a networking opportunity as anything else. Right. But Berklee's a great school, but not everybody who graduates Berklee is completely awesome, because people are different. And and then there's awesome people out there who never went to a music school at all.
Yep, absolutely. And I meet them all the time, and it's cool. It is. Tour plans. Are you guys starting to open up a little? No tour plans yet?
When we know, you'll know. There's a couple of things that, we're all waiting to see. I think everybody's waiting to see what happens this fall, right?
Right.
So listen, it's a little early, but I think in a couple of months, a lot of news is going to break on several fronts. I mean, have we even considered what it's going to look like when the floodgates open and every single band wants to go on tour all at the same time? I mean, there's only so many venues,
right?
And it's not like all of them survived COVID anyway. Yeah. So there's a supply and demand problem there. So I don't know what this is going to look like, but just, we're almost there. We're almost there. Give it a little more time, and we'll be able to talk about it a little more.
Yeah, it'd be great. And come see me in Chicago, man.
Yeah. I mean, you must have been to Reggie's a couple times, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I played Reggie's. I played Martyrs. I played Park West a long time ago.
Yeah, Martyrs.
Weasel and Amit. But lately it's been Reggie's.
Yeah. And that's a rock and roll club. That's a metal club right there.
Yeah. I remember once we were on stage at Reggie's, and the stage is kind of like the cement thing, and there's a sewer grate there, and a rat ran underneath Guthrie's feet while he was playing, and we've never seen him move so fast or jump so high. We were just like, what? Like, what's going on over there? Like, because he's not like a big showman or anything like that. Suddenly, he's like jumping up in the air, and we're like,
and that's what makes the great shows right there.
I know. It's funny.
Very cool. Hey, Bryan, man, I appreciate this. This has been so much fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Let us know when you're touring. New album is out. The Aristocrats live in Europe.
Live. Where is it? Yeah, there's Freeze. Live in Europe 2020. It's all backwards. I can't figure these things out.
Way cool.
All right. Yeah. Thanks so much.
I look forward to seeing you here in Chicago, man.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.